Focus with Ejaz Haidar. We begin this evening with a review of Pakistan-India relations. In the past 2 months, Pakistan has been signaling a thaw in relations. There have also been sub-signals from the Indian side. Last February, DGMOs on both sides announced a ceasefire at the line of control. At the Islamabad Security Dialogue, there was talk about burying the past and talks in a conducive environment. Stories began circulating about the possibility of an Indian contingent participating in a multilateral counter-terrorism exercise, which will be hosted later this year by Pakistan for military contingents from SCO member states. There was also talk about the possibility of Shah Mahmood Qureshi meeting with India's Foreign Minister S.J. Shankar on the sidelines of the Heart of Asia Istanbul process, which is underway in Dushanbe. Qureshi, who left for Dushanbe yesterday, however, said no such meeting was requested or scheduled. Since India's illegal annexation of occupied Kashmir in August 2019, Pakistan has maintained that any talks are contingent on India reversing its illegal and unilateral actions. There's a growing sense that Pakistan might be walking back on that precondition. Where does that leave Kashmiris? What actions must India take or Pakistan expects India to take for any talks to move forward? Can the BJP government of Narendra Modi, India's Prime Minister, be trusted? What would be the impact on Pakistan's entire India and Kashmir policies if Pakistan is duped again? Questions abound. To discuss these questions, I'm joined by Ambassador Najmuddin, former Foreign Secretary. Let's begin here, Ambassador Sheikh, giving your initial thoughts about this growing sense that perhaps Pakistan is walking back on the precondition that it has been talking about since that illegal action on 5th August 2019.
Well, I thought that when in February, when this ceasefire was announced and was agreed upon by the military on both sides, and that agreement was clearly something that had been fully endorsed by the civilians on both sides, by civilian governments on both sides. It talked about addressing the core interests, core concerns of both parties. The language was somewhat ambiguous, but it was clearly meant to indicate that if India had concerns about terrorism, Pakistan had concerns about, first and foremost, about Kashmir. So I think that addressing those core concerns was something that was part of the agreement for the ceasefire agreement, for the ceasefire announced.
Ambassador Sheikh, let me interject here, because when we talk to our sources, we were told that this particular agreement is a purely military agreement, standalone. It may become a stepping stone towards the broader thing, but it's essentially with reference to the line of control and the language. And I agree with you about the ambiguity in the language, but the reference to core concerns was essentially about the military concerns on both sides of the line of control. So that's what the sources said. And so I'm not sure if the issue of core concerns within that particular agreement referred to anything broader.
My understanding was that this was something that had been endorsed and by the civilian structures on both sides. The agreement was undoubtedly between the militaries, but that this was with the full agreement of the civilian structures on both sides. If there was any problem on that particular score, then we are back to square one, and square one should represent what? Square one should represent perhaps going back to the Shimla agreement, going back to the fact that both countries have agreed to talk to find a final solution. Now, that is not something that I think the Indians have in mind, but that would seem to be the fallback position. If that is the position that we are looking at, when you say that we've walked back, I'm not sure as to whether that is really the intent, and I am not sure whether other interested parties would not view this with concern. And when I say other parties, I mean neighbors such as China and Russia, or rather more distant powers, but interested in the area, the United States. I think all of them had welcomed this particular agreement and had thought of it as being a first step towards talking about the connectivity that was one of the things that emerged from this national security dialogue, that Pakistan is going to be looking to connectivity. And if it is looking to connectivity, it is looking to connectivity between South Asia and Central Asia. It's looking to which includes both electricity and the Kasa and gas, both from Central Asia to Pakistan, and perhaps in the case of gas, also moving on to India. Kasa also could be something that would generate sufficient power to meet not only Pakistan's requirements, but to go further down into South Asia. So I'm not sure that this was the intent, or that this was really something that we find difficult. What I think is necessary and is what is probably of concern is that the persecution of the Kashmiris continues. The last thing I saw today was that Mehbooba Mufti, who's a partner of the BJP after 5th August, before 5th August 2019, but who continued the association with her and who was released in 2020, but is now being denied a passport, ostensibly because she does not meet the requirements. But it seems to me that the Indians have great difficulties in Kashmir because the Kashmiris are not prepared to accept what they've done, what the Indians are doing. The Indian expectation that within 6 months of 5th August 2019, all will be well in Kashmir. This has not come about, nor has it come about even now.
Right. So what you're saying, basically, so there are two things here. One is whether the idea of connectivity and geoeconomics can actually be something that can happen without normalization with India. That's one thing, and I agree with you that there seems to be a structural problem with wedding realpolitik with geoeconomics. The other thing is that what you said about what's happening in Kashmir. So are you saying that the idea of right now is to basically look at the issue of Kashmir from two different prisms? One is the issue of human rights, what's happening, and to somehow get India to straighten that out. But in the process, to accept that what India has unilaterally done is something that is not going to reverse.
Well, that's the point is that what India wanted to do in Kashmir, they have not been able to achieve. As I said, 6 months is what they had originally talked about. 18 months later, Kashmir is still very far from being the settled problem that settled union territory problem that Prime Minister Modi tried to make it out to be. So they are having difficulties there. There is a great deal of concern being expressed by human rights bodies and by others who are concerned about the human rights violations that are taking place in Kashmir and which are taking place in India itself. But on the other hand, you see that Prime Minister Modi's own national agenda seems to be prevailing. Right now, it appears that he will probably defeat Trinamool and Ms. Banerjee.
Absolutely. I'm going to, Ambassador Sheikh, I'm going to get to that. I'm definitely going to get to that because there's a connection here. But I'm also now joined by Ambassador Ahmad, also Foreign Secretary with long experience both bilateral and multilateral diplomacy. In the program, what we actually discussing is a kind of review. There is an increasing perception, unfortunately, that perhaps Pakistan is walking back from the very central and, to my mind, a very legitimate precondition that any talks, and there have been frameworks, call them the baskets, call them the pillars, but going back to that requires that India reverses the unilateral actions that it took on 5th August 2019. So give me your sense of how you're looking at this signaling and what are your concerns and impressions?
I agree with you that we have made certain commitments, and we seem to be now pushing ourselves away from those commitments. But I personally don't think that we have pulled back from those commitments. In my view, our commitment remains intact. Imran Khan, I don't think Imran Khan has given up talking about the atrocities that India is committing against the Kashmiris in occupied Kashmir. He still is, his main priority at this moment is perhaps to have those hardships alleviated. And his entire focus at the moment is not on any solution or any India-Pakistan dialogue for a future relationship between the two countries. I think the benchmarks and the thresholds have been changing in the recent past, especially after Modi took over. We are no longer talking about a Kashmir solution because I don't think it is possible with Modi to have any dialogue, any purposeful dialogue.
So Ambassador Khan, let me interject here. Are you saying, if I've understood you correctly, are you saying that we are not looking at any solution? We are not looking at India reversing its unilateral actions? And if that is so, then what exactly are we talking about?
You see, when you are not pursuing any particular objective, that does not mean that you have abdicated from your principled position on that objective. You know, this is a game of tactics. Tactically, you have to play many cards. So I think from the very beginning, ever since Imran Khan assumed the responsibility of Kashmiri ambassador, I think he has been talking about the undoing of the 5th August illegal steps by Modi. So I don't think he has gone back on those commitments. But at the same time, all these recent contexts or cosmetic measures which have recently appeared should not be seen that we have abdicated from our principled positions. We are committed, and I think we remain steadfast. So what we are looking for is an opportunity where we can directly engage with India through any channel. I don't know the extent to which we have been able to establish any context with India, but I want to say that for diplomats, these are opportunities that we cannot let go only because certain anticipated things have not happened. So here also, for example,
let me take this back to Ambassador Sheikh here. Ambassador Sheikh, I have always had, as a student of international relations, I've always had a certain issue with the idea of a principled stand, because I think realpolitik is about lots of other things except principles. Not that one does not have certain necessary determinants of one's security and foreign policy, but I'm not prepared to call them principles. So that's one thing. And secondly, as Ambassador Sheikh said, if there is no objective right now, then what kind of policy are we talking about? I mean, you got to have some kind of objective, whether you look at it in terms of what is desirable, whether you look at it in terms of what is doable, but you got to have some kind of objective in order for you to pursue a policy.
Well, I think that rather than desirable, you think in terms of what is doable. And what you say in terms of what is doable must take account of the long and arduous negotiations, I assume, that took place before the ceasefire announcement was made. Now, in those arduous negotiations, there was, I think, harking back to 2007, to the fact that we said we will try and think in terms of we have 7 subjects, we have 9 subjects, but we have some which are low-hanging fruits, and let us see whether we can grab those while we continue to talk. Now, obviously, none of those low-hanging fruits really, none of those proposals or those expectations were really met. But from 2007 onwards, we were negotiating from time to time, and from time to time, the relations would be exacerbated, but then they would come back, and we would continue down that particular path. And I think that if right now what Foreign Minister Qureshi said is going to hold, then that seems to be what lies ahead. And I'm not sure that this will be entirely welcome either in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization or the other fora at which India and Pakistan will be participating. Now, to say that we will be at the conference, but no meeting has been scheduled, I think is really not what we want. What we want is that you have a conversation of some sort with regard to what is doable.
No, but Ambassador, with respect, let me interject here. It's not just about what we want. It's also about what India wants. So there's got to be a reciprocity. Now, as the National Security Advisor, Dr. Moeed Yusuf indicated to Karan Thapar last year when Karan interviewed him, it was India that was approaching us because for a number of reasons it was under pressure. Now, it seems to me that since that approach, we seem to be opening up far more space to India. As a matter of fact, I've actually written about this, that the entire narrative is now being controlled by India. And that's something which obviously does not, I don't have to say this, does not redound to the advantage of Pakistan. That's one thing. And secondly, I don't think there's ever been any low-hanging fruit between India and Pakistan. I mean, people, you remember people used to talk about Siachen, and there were several rounds, as you are aware. People used to talk about Sir Creek. Navies on both sides actually conducted surveys and all of that. But at the end of the day, all of it came to naught because there are structural problems in terms of approaches on both sides.
I'm not disagreeing with that. As I said, the low-hanging fruit that we talked about in 2007 never really came to any result at all. But the point is that the dialogue, limping, crippled, making no advance, continued in one fashion or the other. Right now, I think what you're looking at is that while we talk about making some concrete advances towards that particular connectivity, that geo-economic advantage of Pakistan's location, till we make it bear some fruit in that particular direction, I think that the conversation will be of the same nature as in 2007. But I don't think that there is reason to suggest that the conversation should not happen. You will, if you have a meeting, for instance, Foreign Minister Qureshi has said that there is no meeting planned in Dushanbe. But if there is a meeting, it'll be of the same nature as the meetings in 2007, yielding no result, but just keeping a dialogue open. That is, I think you think of it as being dictated by the Indian plan. I'm not sure that that is necessarily so. I
said the narrative is being controlled by India. I have the misfortune as occupational hazard to obviously monitor the media, what is written, what is being spoken. So what I'm saying is on the basis of that. But stay with me, Ambassador Sheikh. Let me go back to Ambassador Khan here. Ambassador Khan, once again, I don't want to belabor this point, but I personally think that one has to have some kind of objective in order for things to move forward. Now, the difference between pre-5th August 2019 dialogue framework and post-5th August 2019 non-dialogue, and if this situation has to move towards talks, the difference is that up until then, India had not illegally annexed occupied Kashmir. That action is not only, and of course there are petitions in the Indian Supreme Court challenging that. So there are lots of people in India who think that it's unconstitutional. But it is also violative of bilateral Shimla Agreement, Lahore agreements, and of course the UN Security Council resolutions. So unless Pakistan can maintain and be very firm about India reversing that, I do not understand what kind of dialogue we're talking about.
You see,
Ambassador Shamshad.
Yes, India-Pakistan context. First of all, since we have been talking of low-hanging fruits also, well, no matter how many times we have had such occasions with low-hanging fruits, but those low-hanging fruits were never ripe enough to be picked up. So I don't think that we can expect any results from India-Pakistan contacts on the sidelines of regional or international conferences. In the first instance, as Mahmood Qureshi has said, that there is no scheduled meeting at today's Dushanbe meeting. So let's not tag too much of expectations on such events which are unlikely to take place. And in any case, when we talk of policies, I'm specifically answering your observation on the objective on India-Pakistan issues. Well, I think if there is any constant policy in our foreign policy, any constant objectivity, well, it was the issue of Kashmir. No government in Pakistan has ever deviated from our this constant foreign policy on Kashmir. So the main objective still remains. I don't think Imran Khan's government has resigned from the main objective that the people of Kashmir are the final arbiters of their future. They will decide through an impartial, fair, open plebiscite. So that objective is very much there. I don't think any government can say that this is no longer our objective. But what really is, you see, what we need to understand is that on these occasions, like the Dushanbe conference or Bishkek conference a year ago. I think it was the Shanghai Cooperation meeting. So these meetings will provide you opportunities to get together, not for any substantive discussion. Nowhere in India-Pakistan context have we ever discussed substantive issues on the sidelines of these regional conferences. I think the only occasion when Vajpayee and Nawaz Sharif discussed on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly was, I think, 1998, when our dialogue was suspended for some time, and they needed to resume the dialogue. So that's why they had to. And again, for that, we had made all the preparation in Johannesburg, in South Africa, and we just presented to them the agreement that the two foreign secretaries had already reached there. So the foreign ministers or prime ministers, they will just be shaking hands if they at all meet at these events. So we shouldn't be even expecting that any complete result will come out. These are just diplomatic photo ops. So let's just leave them there. And especially in India,
diplomatic niceties. I'm happy you talked about the fact that the low-hanging fruit never were ripe enough for picking, because I know that you were part of those rounds. But thank you so much. That was Ambassador Shamshad Ahmad Khan. Thank you also to Ambassador Najmuddin Sheikh. We shall take a short break and return to discuss thought policing measures introduced by India in occupied Kashmir. Stay with us. Welcome back to In Focus. After having illegally annexed Kashmir, a disputed and occupied territory as per UN Security Council resolutions, and this happened on 5th August 2019, Indian government has now introduced thought policing measures to stem any dissent in the restive territory. Government officials, both serving and aspiring candidates, are required to be cleared by the Criminal Investigation Department through a verification process. The new measure requires government employees to share details of their social media accounts, mainly Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. CID verification is required for employees to get paid. The order says government instructions are not being adhered to in some departments, as a result of which many individuals with dubious character, antecedents, and conduct have been paid without obtaining mandatory CID verification. It is worth noting that Indian occupied Kashmir has nearly 500,000 people employed in various government departments, making the government the single largest employer. The order is the latest in a series of measures, some of them striking at the heart of right to free speech imposed by the Indian government since it abrogated the Muslim majority region's limited autonomy in August 2019, as I said earlier in my opening. Such is the fear that dozens of Kashmiri writers, activists, and journalists that we tried to approach to comment on these measures, and I'm saying this for this particular program, refused to say anything publicly for fear of reprisals, including arrest and seizure of passports. This included Kashmiris residing abroad, but with families still in occupied Kashmir. To discuss the situation further, I am joined by Dr. Steve Bronnner, Professor of Political Science at Rutgers and Director of Global Relations for the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights. With him, I have Dr. Yaqoob Bangash, a historian of modern South Asia and Assistant Professor at Information Technology University. Thank you to both panelists. Let me kick off with Dr. Bronnner. Dr. Bronnner, what are your initial thoughts about the measures that are being taken by the Indian government in Jammu and Kashmir?
From what I understand, most people don't appreciate the importance of free speech. Free speech is the precondition for all other civil liberties. Meaningful elections, the right of assembly, the right of religion, all of these liberties depend on free speech. So when that is taken away, it's as if the entire infrastructure of freedom begins to crumble. It seems to me that also, that insofar as we're talking about social media, something new is on the agenda. It used to be that freedom of speech is a special thing when somebody gives a lecture, when somebody makes a political talk, or publishes a book. This speaks to the everyday life of everyday people. And it's as if for the entire population, or the entire Kashmiri population, it's as if Big Brother is watching them. Because as everyone knows, everything about a person is on social media. So when that becomes open to governmental scrutiny and governmental determinations, what can appear there, and governmental judgments about what is said there, we're talking about an intensification of dictatorship, or better, an intensification of authoritarianism.
Let me go to Dr. Bangash here. Yaqoob, Bangash, give me your initial thoughts before we proceed further with more specifics.
Thanks, Ajaz. Well, I think that this new directive, which came about in early March, is very much in line with what Modi has been doing in Indian-occupied Kashmir for the last couple of years. What this now really shows is that what he really wants to do is to make the world's largest sort of ghetto, the world's largest perhaps concentration camp in the world, in Indian-occupied Kashmir, because not only has their autonomy been taken away, at least it was on paper at least there, that was taken away in August 2019, and now they don't even want people to think, as my colleague just said, that the freedom of speech underpins most other freedoms. So what they really want to do is they want to create this kind of this ghetto, this concentration camp in Kashmir, where you are physically not free, but you are also mentally not free. You can't think and do anything. Now, I should underscore here that getting security clearance and everything is very much a part of most civil services in the world. In India and Pakistan, this has been happening too. But those are for extreme cases, that you are not part of a terrorist group, or you're not part of some group that wants to undermine the state. But this is actually sort of mind policing, to ask people to give their to give their Facebook IDs and Twitter IDs and all these other kinds of things, means that they really want to control what people think. And what I really find fascinating is that this is even applicable on people who want to apply to government jobs, which means that they really want to sift through people who even want to apply to a government job, that even at the point of application, you are being given this, this great bar is now being pushed against you. So they really want to create a very pliable, a very controlled, a very ghettoized Kashmir, which is completely controlled by them, because that is their grand plan, that with that they will be able to subjugate Kashmir to such an extent that no Kashmiri within a generation would be able to say anything against the government. And this is not just about Kashmir, and I think this is something very important for our Indian viewers here watching. If he gets away with this in Kashmir, if he gets away with these curbs in Kashmir, they will continue. They will go to Punjab, they'll go to UP, they'll go to other places where people disagree with the government. So this is a very dangerous precedent, and if it survives in Kashmir, it will be implemented in other places. So this is kind of a very important place where, at least it's begun with the civil service, but very soon it will come up to other things. In other states in India, they have that tag of anti-national. Here in Kashmir, they've even asked for volunteers, to pick out these anti-nationals, which means that vigilantism will now grow in Indian occupied Kashmir. So this is a very dangerous thing where the personal safety of people, of individual people, no matter what they say, can be threatened and challenged.
So it's a slippery slope, as you have argued. But Dr. Bronnner, what Dr. Bangash is saying is actually already happening even in mainland India. I'm sure you're familiar with how an eminent academic Dr. Mehta had to resign from Ashoka University. One of his colleagues resigned, to show solidarity with him. There are a number of writers, stand-up comedians, activists who are serving jail sentences right now in India. Now, when I talk to discerning Indians, they say that this is not part of the spirit of the Indian Constitution. But we see a very clear slide. Now, since you also study genocide and human rights, give me your sense of how you look at India since the BJP under Prime Minister Narendra Modi took over.
First of all, let me make 2 points. The first point is, in keeping with what my colleague said, when censorship is implied, any kind of censorship, a layer of bureaucracy arises to do the censorship, and its primary aim is to grow larger. That's the underpinning for this dangerous precedent. Once it starts, it's very difficult to put the genie back in the bottle, if I can put it that way. The second thing is this. India was a symbol to the world because of its commitment to constitutional democracy and its attempt to modernize it at the same time. But the Constitution itself means very little if it's not operative. And probably the most radical constitution, the most emancipatory constitution, was written under Stalin, but it wasn't put into practice. And that's what's happening here. It's almost as if the constitutional democracy of India is used as a cover for what is becoming the power grab of a particular religious party, the BDP, and if you like, a justification for religious intolerance on a radical scale. So that's basically how I would put this. I think one has to begin with the institutions that are both applying the censorship and affected by it. So, for example, the exile group of Stand by Kashmir, which has 30,000 people. All of these this is affected deeply by this kind of social media censorship. I know that my organization, the International Council for Diplomacy and Dialogue, has been working with some Indian groups, and this has been made particularly difficult now with the introduction of this new policy. So, in a certain way, it does indeed, as my colleague said, create a huge new ghetto for the world, but it also insulates, or is an attempt to insulate, the authoritarian Indian government from the outside and outside pressure.
Right. Dr. Bangash, Dr. Bronnner has made a very interesting point. And I know that you've been working on the Indian Constitution. You have been working on how the Indian judiciary has, adjudicated issues. So give me your sense of how you look at the sort of deviation from the spirit of the Constitution, and also the functioning of the higher judiciary in terms of how they have adjudicated issues in the last 3 to 4 years.
Thanks, Sajaz. I should say that Dr. Bronnner was very spot on in what he was talking about having an effective constitution, because a constitution can be as perfect as you want it on paper, but if it's actually not effective, then it kind of loses its merit. And I think that is what this BJP government is very much doing. It is not tinkering with the constitution itself. It's just keeping it there, but it's undermining it by actually making it ineffective so that it can go on with its authoritarian agenda. Now, actually, speaking about the Indian constitution itself, great genius of the Indian that it was not a majoritarian constitution. It was not the constitution of a political party. The Congress did not make the Indian constitution. The Indian people made the Indian constitution. And it was a rights-based constitution. So when we talk about the undermining of freedom of speech and other rights, that is undermining the basic framework of India, because upon that was predicated the constitutional settlement that Ambedkar led, but other people were very much involved with it also. It was a rights-based settlement that was actually brought in, and that is how India actually propelled itself ahead as a constitutional democracy. And that was the basic building block and framework of it. And this is something that this BJP regime is trying to undermine by making it ineffective, by giving it a color that what was the constitutional settlement was a political one, that Nehru made the settlement and he was a Congress party leader. All of that is actually hogwash. It was a broad-based political settlement that a large percentage of India very much agreed with. So it's trying to kind of make it ineffective. It's trying to undermine the broad-based consensus, and it's trying to undermine the basic building block, which is freedoms that the Indian constitution brings forth. And I think that is a very dangerous thing to do, because that will actually unravel India. India will unravel internally, because the basic agreement, the basic social contract that actually brought it together was this constitution, and the BJP is unraveling it. Now onto the judiciary. The Indian judiciary has actually in the past led the way in making very creative interpretations of the constitution and in upholding rights. I'm sure you remember that when Indira Gandhi pushed on the emergency, it was the Indian Supreme Court that actually threw it out. Even after that, the Indian Supreme Court, through public interest litigation throughout the 1980s, actually made several very important interventions in terms of preserving human rights and constitutional values. But what this government has managed to do incredibly, really, is to undermine the independence of the superior judiciary, and secondly, to ensure that there are enough BJP-type ideologues in the judiciary that they will not say anything about it. The whole judgment on the Babri Mosque thing is a case in point. None of the judges said that there was a temple at the spot of Babri Mosque, but they still gave the land to the Mandir authorities. And that is really where the Indian judiciary is actually going. So that was a bulwark against any majoritarianism, any attempt to make the constitution ineffective by an authoritarian government. But that has been very severely undermined by this BJP government. And that creates a further problem, because unless this government is defeated at the polls, which seems very unlikely in the recent, in the future, it will be very hard for anyone to prevent this authoritarianism from going ahead and gaining more power and solidifying its base. And the parallels, of course, my colleague works on genocide and all these other kinds of things, but the parallels to Nazi Germany are just fascinating, because this is really the rise of Hitler, how he consolidated power, how the nationalist socialists in Germany consolidated power, targeted a particular group of people, then consolidated the authoritarian base towards attacking them, and then actually began to threaten the nation itself. And they actually, nearly unraveled the whole German nation. This is exactly what the BJP is doing. And that is a great threat, not only to India itself internally, but also to the rest of the world.
Far from losing elections, Dr. Bangash, from what one can see, they're likely to even win West Bengal and defeat the All India Trinamool Congress. But let me go back to Dr. Bronnner for some last thoughts. Dr. Bronnner, this example from history that Dr. Bangash has talked about in terms of Nazi Germany and how Adolf Hitler and his party consolidated power. Given that, and there are a number of people who are actually making that historical connection. Give me your sense of how you look at that connection. And given what happened then, Do you think there is real fear that we might be sort of moving towards another disastrous situation in South Asia?
There is a tendency now towards creating an authoritarian disaster. That, I think, is almost indisputable. Whether it's going to look the way the Nazis did, that's another matter. It was a different kind of system that was in place. There were a set of internal developments that were, shall we say, if not unique, certainly singular and resistible. It's very important to when you look at Nazi Germany, and this is before the final solution, that is to say, the creation of a concentration camp universe that resulted in the death of Jews and 6 million Jews and so many others. There were possibilities to prevent what happened. There were political decisions that were made or not made that allowed Hitler to enter office and assume the power he did. The thing to look for, in my opinion, is for a situation in which you have a uniformed armed party with a paramilitary force on the one hand, a debilitated left in the case of Nazi Germany, social democracy, and the Communist Party. But most importantly, there is a group of mainstream conservatives that facilitate the road to power. In Germany, that was a cabinet led by someone named Fritz von Papen, a really slimy figure. And he led what was called the Cabinet of the Barons. And this cabinet, composed primarily of industrialists, was basically forced to choose in the following way. Either it could develop radical social policies that would benefit the far left, the working class, and keep its power, or it could basically give up the government and the Weimar Republic and preserve its economic control and undermine the workers' movement. And to the extent to which that exists, that situation exists in India, to that extent, rather, you really have to worry. I'm not sure it's the same thing, and it doesn't have to be the same thing.
But I believe there are signs, and I agree with you. I mean, there are certain situations that are unique to what happened in Germany, but there are also enough signs to sort of somehow create that concern with reference to what's happening in India. But thank you so much, Dr. Stephen Bronnner, for your insights. Thank you to Dr. Yaqoob Bangash. This is all from In Focus tonight. We shall see you tomorrow at the same time. Keep following our latest updates on social media at indus.news. And given the third COVID-19 wave, both in Pakistan and across the world, stay safe and follow the non-vaccine safety protocols. Good night and goodbye.